BFG. Last time we stopped with this picture. The BFG, the friendly giant, is talking to Sophie. He's revealing secrets to her about why he was in the village and what he was doing with the trumpet thingy. We found out that he's a dream-catching giant and he can hear them. And now he's going to explain to her how he hears them. So we'll start back up. They may be as looking a bit prosperous to you, BFG said, but you must believe me when I say they is very extra usual ears indeed. They is not to be coughed at. Well, I'm quite sure they're not, Sophie said. They is allowing me to hear absolutely every single twiddly little thing. You mean you can hear things that I can't hear? Sophie asked. You is deaf as dumpling compared with me, cried the BFG. You is hearing only thumping loud noises with those little earwigs of yours, but I'm hearing all the secret whisperings of the world. Such as what? Sophie asked. In your country, I's hearing the footsteps of a ladybird as she goes walking across a leaf, he said. Honestly? Beginning to be impressed, Sophie said. What's more, I is hearing those footsteps very loud, BFG said. When a ladybird is walking across a leaf, I is hearing her feet go crumpety, crumpety, clumpety, clump like giant footsteps. Good gracious me, Sophie said. What else can you hear? I is hearing little ants chittering to each other as they scuttle around in the soil. You mean you can hear ants talking? Every single word, BFG said, although I is not exactly understanding their language. Go on, Sophie said. Sometimes, on a very clear night, he said, and if I is swiggling my ears in the right direction, and here he swiveled his giant great ears upward so they are facing the ceiling. If I is swiggling them like this, and the night is very clear, I is sometimes hearing faraway music coming from the stars in the sky. A queer little shiver passed through Sophie's body. She sat very quiet, waiting for more. My ears is what told me you was watching me out of your window last night, BFG said. But I didn't make any sound, she said. I was hearing your heart beating across the road, loud as a drum. Go on, Sophie said, please. I can hear plants and trees. Do they talk? She asked. They is not exactly talking, but they is making noises. For instance, if I come along and I is picking a lovely flower, if I is twisting the stem of the flower till it breaks, the plant is screaming. I can hear it screaming and screaming very clear. You don't mean it, Sophie cried. How awful. It is screaming just like you would be screaming if someone was twisting your arm right off. Is that really true? Sophie asked. You think I is swizz-figgling you? It's rather hard to believe. Then I is stopping right here, said the BFG sharply. I is not wishing to be called a fibster. Oh, no, I'm not calling you anything, Sophie cried. I believe you. I do. Really. Please go on. The BFG gave her a long, hard stare. Sophie looked right back at him, her face open to his. I believe you, she said softly. She had offended him, and she could see that. I wouldn't ever be fibbling to you, he said. I know you wouldn't, she said. But you must understand that it isn't easy to believe such amazing things straight away. I understand that, the BFG told her. So do. Please forgive me and go on, she said. He waited a while longer, and then he said, It is the same with the trees as it is with the flowers. If I is chopping an axe into the trunk of a big tree, I is hearing a terrible sound coming from the inside of the heart of the tree. What sort of sound? Sophie asked. A soft moaning sound. It is like the sound of an old man is making when he is dying slowly. He paused. The cave was very silent. Trees is living and growing just like you and me. They is alive. So is plants, he told her. He was sitting very straight in his chair now, his hand clasped tightly together in front of him. His face was bright, his eyes round and bright as two stars. "Such wonderful and terrible sounds I is hearing," he said. "Some of them you would never wish to be hearing yourself, but some is like glorious music." He seemed almost to be transfigured by the excitement of his thoughts. His face was beautiful in its blaze of emotions. "Tell me some more about them," Sophie said quietly. "You just ought to be hearing the little Mises talking," he said. "Little Mises is always talking to each other, and I is hearing them loud as my own voice." "What do they say?" "Only the Mises know that," he said. "Spiders is also talking a great deal. Might not be thinking it, but spiders is the most tremendous natterboxes. And when they is spinning their webs, they is singing all the time. They is singing sweeter than a nightingale." "Who else do you hear?" Sophie asked. "One of the biggest chatbags is the cattle piddlers," says the BFG. "Well, what do they say?" "They is arguing all the time about who is going to be the prettiest butterfly. That is all they is ever talking about." "Is there a dream floating around in here now?" Sophie asked. The BFG moved his great ears this way and that, listening intently. He shook his head. "There is no dream in here," he said, "except in the bottles over there. I has a special place to go catching dreams. They is not often coming to giant country." "How do you catch 'em?" "The same way you is catching buttery flies," he answered. "With a net." He stood up and crossed over to a corner of the cave where a pole was leaning against the wall. The pole was about 30 feet long, and there was a net on the end of it. "Here's the dream catcher," he said, grasping the pole in one hand. "Every morning I is going out and snitching new dreams to put in my bottles." Suddenly, he seemed to lose interest in the conversation. "I is getting hungry," he said. "It is time for eats." Next chapter, this one's one of my favorites. I think you'll like it. The name of this chapter is Snozcumbers. "But if you don't eat people like all the others," Sophie said, "then what do you live on?" "That is a squelching, tricky problem around here," the BFG answered. "In this slosh-flunking giant country, happy eats like pineapples and pigwinkles is simply not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky-poo vegetable. It is called the snozcumber." "The snozcumber?" Sophie cried. "There is no such thing." The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square white teeth. "Yesterday, we was not believing in giants, was we? Today, we is not believing in snozcumbers. Just because we happen not to have actually seen something with our own two little winkles, we think it is not existing. What about, for instance, the great Squizzly Scotchhopper?" "I beg your pardon?" Sophie said. "And the Humplecrimp." "What's that?" Sophie asked. "And the Rap Rascal." "The what?" she said. "And the Crumpscottle." "Well, are they animals?" Sophie asked. "They is common animals," said the BFG contemptuously. "I is not a very know-all giant myself, but it seems to me that you is absolutely know-nothing human being. Your brain is full of rotten wool." "You mean cotton wool?" Sophie said. "What I mean and what I say is two different things," the BFG announced rather grandly. "I will now show you a snozcumber." The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest looking thing Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long again as an ordinary man, but was much thicker. It was as thick around its girth as a perambulator. It was black with white stripes along its length, and it was covered all over with coarse knobbles. Here we have a picture with the BFG holding the snozcumber. "Here is the repulsant snozcumber," cried the BFG, waving it about. "I squoggle it. I mispise it. I desponge it. But because I was refusing to gobble up human beings like the other giants, I must spend my life guzzling up icky poo snozzcumbers instead. If I don't, I'll be nothing but skin and groans." "You mean skin and bones?" Sophie said. "I know it is bones, but please understand that I cannot be helping it if sometimes I is saying things a little squiggly. I is trying my very best all the time." The big friendly giant looked suddenly so forlorn that Sophie got quite upset. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to be rude." "There never was any schools to teach me talking in giant country," BFG said sadly. "But couldn't your mother have taught you?" Sophie asked. "My mother?" cried the BFG. "Giants don't have mothers. Surely you is knowing that." "I did not know that," Sophie said. "Who ever heard of a woman giant?" shouted the BFG, waving the snozzcumber around his head like a giant lasso. "There never was a woman giant, and there never will be one. Giants is always men." Sophie felt herself getting a little muddled. "In that case, how were you born?" "Giants isn't born," he answered. "Giants appears, and that's all there is to it. They simply appears, the same way as the sun and the stars." "And when did you appear?" Sophie asked. "Now how on earth could I be knowing a thing like that?" said the BFG. "It was so long ago I couldn't count." "You mean you don't even know how old you are?" "No giant is knowing that," said the BFG. "All I is knowing about myself is that I is very old, very, very old and crumply, perhaps as old as the earth." "What happened when a giant dies?" Sophie asked. "Giants is never dying," he answered. "Sometimes, and quite suddenly, a giant is disappearing, and nobody is ever knowing where he goes. But mostly us giants is simply going on and on like whipsy time whittlers." The BFG was still holding the awesome snozzcumber in his right hand, and now he put one end into his mouth and bit off a huge hunk of it. He started crunching it up, and the noise that it made was like crunching of lumps of ice. "It's filthing," he sputtered, speaking with his mouth full and spraying large pieces of snozzcumber like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around on the table, ducking out of the way. "It's disgusterous," the BFG gurgled. "It's sickable. It's rotsome. It's maggot-wise. Try it yourself, this foulsome snozzcumber." "No, thank you," Sophie said, backing away. "It's all you're going to be guzzling around here from now on, so you might as well get used to it," he said. "Go on, you snipsy little winkle, have a go." Sophie took a small nibble. "Ugh," she spluttered. "Oh no, oh gosh, oh help." She spat it out quickly. "It tastes as frog skins," she gasped. "And rotten fish." "Worse than that," cried the BFG, roaring with laughter. "To me it's tasting of clock coaches and slime wanglers." "Do we really have to eat it?" Sophie said. "You do, unless you is wanting to become so thin you will be disappearing into a thick ear." "Into thin air," Sophie said. "A thick ear is something quite different." Once again, that sad, winsome look came into the BFG's eyes. "Words," he said, "is such a twitch-tickling problem to me all my life. So you must simply try to be patient and stop squibbling. As I am telling you before, I know exactly what words I am wanting to say, but somehow or other they is always getting squiddled around." "That happens to everyone," Sophie said. Here we have a picture. A picture of the BFG eating the rotsome snozzcumber, spitting it everywhere. Sophie on the table. "So that happens to everyone," Sophie said. "Not like it happens to me. I is speaking the most terrible Wiglish." "I think you speak beautifully," Sophie said. "You do?" cried the BFG, suddenly brightening. "You really do?" Simply beautifully, Sophie repeated. Well, that is the nicest present anybody is ever giving me in my whole life, cried the BFG. Are you sure you is not twiddling my leg? Here's more of the conversation on the table. Sophie next to the snozzcumber. Of course not, Sophie said. I just love the way you talk. How wondercrump, cried the BFG, still beaming. How whoopsie splunkers. How absolutely squiffling. I is all of a stutter. Listen, Sophie said. We don't have to eat snozzcumbers. In the fields around our village, there are all sorts of lovely vegetables like cauliflower and carrots. Why don't you get some of those next time you go visiting? The BFG raised his great head proudly in the air. I is a very honorable giant, he said. I would rather be chewing up lots of snozzcumbers than snitching things from other people. Well, you stole me, Sophie said. I did not steal you very much, said the BFG, smiling gently. After all, you is only a teeny little girl. And we will stop right there. Stay tuned for the next part. We're going to find out more about the giants who live near the BFG. See you next time.